Okay, folks, just want to give you a little bit of an overview. I know I keep saying this every week, but time just goes so fast, right? It's week 7. We're midway through the course, even over midway. And this is the week that your wiki updates are due. So, what I'm going to do right now is kind of go through what you're seeing in front of you, the syllabus, and I also want to make a few reminders in the classroom. So, I'll try to keep this concise, but want to make sure I also give you enough information that you feel confident. This week in our reading selections, we'll be going over Atwell's Valuing and Evaluating Writing. And it's funny, I just got out of a live session with some students who I had evaluate another student's writing that they didn't know even. And in fact, it was like an old test document. And the one girl who's probably my best writer in the class just said, "Oh, I don't like to grade. I would be a terrible teacher. I don't like to give anybody anything but A's." And you know what? It's kind of a know thyself type of moment for me when I think about valuing and evaluating writing. On one hand, I'm a real stickler for grammar and good writing issues, but when it comes down to evaluating somebody's writing, it's very hard for me to grade them harshly because I know that, or maybe even sometimes grade them as strictly as I should, because I know how much heart goes into writing. And I think perhaps writing, more than any other subject, partly because of its subjective nature, we have to acknowledge it's not as black and white as math. In fact, the same student said something, well, it's just not black and white. It's not like math. 2 plus 2 is always 4. That kind of thing. I think that we put ourselves through a lot of angst when we're evaluating. And on one hand, I've had to learn as a teacher that when there's a really I need to be able to trust my gut, that when there's a paper that's not so great, I need to give it its due credit. But if I sense a student is really putting their best out there, I do have that right and privilege as a instructor to do what I feel like is best for promoting future growth in their writing. So these are important things to consider. What I have here is also a link to, so we'll talk about valuing and evaluating. What I have here is a link to an Edutopia blog, and Edutopia is one of my favorite resources for all things teaching. Check it out at some point, but for sure read this one today. And this is a way of giving feedback. So we're going to talk about kind of the our personal philosophies and our research philosophies on feedback and communication, but we're also going to look at some other ways of doing feedback and communication. Please, if you haven't checked it out already, check out the interactive rubric video from our guest speaker from last week. I think I actually posted it 2 weeks ago. That's another way of doing. I've shown you one of my feedback forms that's just real simple, but that kind of conversation in writing I think is so important for future growth. Something very simple that I was told, or that I've been told too, is think of your comments as a sandwich. Start with something positive, give them something that promotes growth or is instructive, and then end with something positive. And I think that kind of packages it so that, yeah, in some ways it's watering down. I guess some could argue watering down your correction, but I believe that if we're talking about really what are we really trying to do in correcting writing? Are we trying to do a gotcha, or are we trying to promote more writing growth? I also sat through a really interesting week-long seminar at Ohio State several years ago, and we had a speaker come in and really challenge us in how we evaluated writers. Almost everybody in the room almost had their master's degree in writing or English already, and so it was one of those classes that was just really fun and intense. One thing he had us do is he passed out papers to all of us, and he asked us to look at them and give them a grade. And he basically gave us several different ways to approach grading writing. And probably one of the things that stuck with me the most is the first time he had us just read it once and give it a grade and go with our gut. And what we found is that when we read it through the second time, our grades were so much more gentle, or I shouldn't say gentle, but we saw something we didn't notice before. So when before I thought it was a real mess of a paper, the second time through saw that the student was really being really creative in the way they presented information. So there's different ways to grade. The other thing I would consider, the reason I have more about rubrics here and some resources with rubrics is partly to help power your wiki, but it's also to have you consider this. I have a hard time with rubrics that are too immense, and sometimes our students and us both need just one thing to work on. So consider, as we're doing this writing workshop approach, chunking, okay, this writing is specifically just to see how you describe things. We're just going to work on description. And here's what good description looks like. Here's my rubric for description. And I'm going to, as I grade your paper, completely ignore this, and this. Or if you have a comprehensive rubric, maybe your institution, like I know Capital, when I'm teaching comp classes, has an institutional rubric that I'm supposed to use. And I'll tell students, first paper, I'm looking at these 2 items on the rubric. The other matter not. Okay? And by the end, then the papers should roll into the final rubric being a more massive rubric. I'm going to pause my recording just for a moment. Okay, I think we successfully paused there. So as you're thinking about designing these rubrics, imagine yourself really using them, and then imagine other ways you can use them besides using a whole big comprehensive rubric. While I'm thinking about evaluating, you probably have noticed that as long as you put forth some depth of thought in answering my responses in discussion board and you responded to other students, you get full credit. That's on purpose, and I have no intentions of changing that. I might ratchet up the blog expectations a bit and review my rubric myself. So if you could take some time this week to review both the discussion board and blog rubric criteria. I want to make sure that we are balancing. I want to make sure that you're balancing the rigor of the course with the fact that if you're doing it all, I have no intention then to give you anything but an A. So, but let's look at those. Let's all review them, and I commit to doing that this week as well. But I wanted to make sure that we're setting out a tone at the beginning of the course of you do it, you make an attempt. I want you to get your ideas out there. That's what's important. But I would, especially in the blog, like you to clean up like grammar, spelling, punctuation, that kind of thing this time around. So take a look at those rubrics. They are in, let me look here. If you're in my course, they will be in, I think, course documents. Okay, never mind, I lied. They're in assignments. Here we go. So there's the course rubrics. Moving on, I want to talk a little bit about some discussion board options, or discussion board and blog prompts this week. This week you're going to think in terms of a scenario between you and a student that's going to involve how you respond in the valuing and evaluating potential area. Okay, so make up a scenario, maybe create a scenario that you kind of knew existed, and just be generic and use one of these. A student plagiarizes. Student shares a personal story but has major mechanical issues. That one's the hardest for me. A student brings you a novel of his to review. What are you going to do with it, with all of your other workload? I'll pause here for a second. This has happened to me a lot. The school that I taught in for 10 years, I literally had 5 preps in 8 periods. So 5 periods out of the day I was teaching different things. I had 1 prep period, and I was teaching classes 7 out of 8 periods a day. All of them were writing intensive. We're talking about 10th grade English, so OGT prep. We're talking about 12th grade. This is their senior stuff. Creative writing, newspaper, and yearbook. I mean, there was a lot of grading, folks. So all of that to say, what do you do then when a student wants you to do even more? Wants you to help him get published, wants you to help her enter a contest. These are all good things, good problems to have, but how are you going to manage this time-wise? Student doesn't have work to share at editing time. Or you come and you have this great lesson plan that revolves around students swapping for a peer edit, and a couple students don't have their stuff. How are you going to respond? Make a plan for one of these scenarios now, or maybe a couple of them, and maybe in your replies, if you could say, okay, I like that idea. I like that you said what you said you would do about plagiarism, but what about this? and add something. And we're not going to see that as a potential conflict. We're going to just share out all the possible ways we can think of to handle these situations, to protect students, to promote learning, and to protect ourselves in our own time. Next part. In a blog, share one rubric source or idea from the readings from this week. Explain how you would potentially use this resource. If you want to do some outside research, you go ahead. But the key here is I want you to really show how you would use it. So if you have another tool that you like better, great, share it out. I'm going to put a couple down here that I didn't have that you might want to consider as tools to explore. VoiceThread. It's a great tool for interaction among multiple speakers. I'm using something right here called Screencast-O-Matic that you could obviously have some implications for giving students feedback with your face right there. Google Docs. What could you do with Google Docs as far as a way of sharing out and revising and helping students to value and evaluate their own writing? Okay, so one resource, how you would use it. Can't wait to collect these. Please go back and read these. Please post these by Wednesday or Thursday so people have a chance to reply. I put an extra announcement in this week, but I'm going to say this verbally as well. This past week I put this in. Enter by Wednesday or Thursday. Reply often. Go back and look at what people's replies are. Keep the conversation going. Just because the week's over doesn't mean that week is closed. There's good stuff going on there, lots of resources. And I would personally start dragging this information into my wiki, even if it's not, even if you have to set up a separate just resource page in your wiki. I'm fine with that. I want you to make sure you answer this stuff, but there might be things that you want to collect. Remember, this wiki is for you, essentially, for going back into and tweaking your own, or having a resource for your own teaching writing adventure in the upcoming weeks and months and years. Okay? So, any ideas you get from the blog or discussion board that you want to save for your own use later, throw them into a wiki space for right now or into another document that you can add to your wiki later, because I really think that that's going to be key as far as just that reflective learning part for us, but also just having lots of ideas to jump into our first teaching job with. Okay, so for what is this wiki? I've had a lot of questions on the wiki. Again, a wiki is an online way of building a portfolio. There's different ways to set up a wiki, and I'm just getting used to the way that this particular program sets them up. What I've done is basically I'm chunking out. Consider if I would have just said at the last week of school, or last month of school, you need to have all of these parts in this giant portfolio. It'd be very overwhelming. So right now what you're doing is you're building the portfolio. It's designed so that you can go back, and it tells me how many times you've gone into your wiki. You can go back and revise each chunk, and then we're going to collate it all into one resource that is your survival resource, your survival kit for your first year of teaching writing. Okay, whatever role that might look like for you. So that's what this is building into. So if you look back through old wikis and look at this one, you'll see how it's kind of building on each other, and I'll kind of flash forward so you can see how it all fits together. So for this wiki entry to be complete over these last couple weeks, and hopefully you've started playing with it a little bit, you're going to have 4 writing tasks. They can all be related to each other in the same unit, or they can be completely different from one another. They can be ones that you started developing in your blog chart and now are creating into more. That's fine. They can be ones that other people brought up that you thought were cool and want to develop. That's fine too. My only requirements with these prompts or writing tasks, we're calling them, because I don't want you to get tunnel vision on this, is that you have a detailed prompt or activity written in student language, that 2 of these be formative, 2 of these be for summative assessment, that each one have a rubric, and you can use the same rubric but tell me how you use it in different ways for each one. That's a possibility. Along with each prompt, teacher notes. This has been messing people up. I didn't want to have a specific language here. If you think of it as a lesson plan, that'd be fine. It can be a narrative of how you think you're going to be using it. It can be a list of resources, bullets, points, however you think. It can be a breakdown of the bell time and how you would use this prompt. That's fine. What terms and ideas are you going to need to master for this lesson to really make sure that the students successfully understand your task and are able to do it? And then finally, I want everything you do, all of these 4 items, all tied into Common Core standards. Justify how you're going to use that. This is due this week. It's a lot. Hopefully you've been building on it. If you have questions specifically for your ideas, always feel free to run them by me. I never mind that. Keep checking your emails, update your announcements, check your updated announcements, and have a great, great